So today has been all about education, and I'm going to talk about failure. And as has already been shared, I've had a fair set of failures in my life. Has anybody here never had a failure? Okay, so there's two people here. How do we feel about failure? Are we comfortable? Do we like it? Do we go, you know what, today I am going to fail? We don't do that. We never go out deliberately to fail. But I have an assertion here that in the school of tomorrow, failure is really, really important, and we need to set out to fail. And I have a few reflections here in these slides and over the next 10 minutes to talk about how we fail safely and how we manage our body chemistry around failure. Because the body reacts to failure and success in a different way. So, how does it feel? How does success feel? Just visualize that in your mind for a moment. Success feels good, doesn't it? It's like a drug. It's like, I did it today. I knocked it out of the park. I hustled. I made it happen. I got it out there. I failed. I failed. It's not good. And what do we do to kids in our schools today? What do we do to kids over exams, entry tests, homework? You failed. You didn't get through that exam. Go to a bad school now. You were successful. Go to a grammar school, as is currently in vogue. My personal belief is that everybody has talents, can do amazing things, whether they're a child or an adult. My other belief is that in the world that we live in now, continuous learning is going to be the thing that defines us. So from cradle to grave, we will keep learning. We will be educated for our entire life. And to get that kind of education, we need to think about how the school of tomorrow spans across our entire life. And somebody very famous in government clearly once said, education, education, education. And I'm going to say we don't need no education. We need something different. We need to change the way we learn. And we need to leverage new skills and new muscles. And we need to learn more from failing. So the title of my talk is Failing to Learn. And the good thing about this talk is, if I fail to get anything across to you, I will have succeeded. And if you learn something today, I will have succeeded. So this isn't zero risk for me. So I'm feeling good. So, failing to learn. When I was at school doing my A-levels, and this was about 400 years ago, I'm that old, I did for my A-levels maths, further maths, physics and chemistry. So you're thinking, don't invite him to our parties. We really don't want him to come along. We thought he was fun when he came on. Now we know his A-level subjects. That's bad. And I had a teacher, and the teacher was called Mr. Anderson. Not this Mr. Anderson, a different Mr. Anderson. So Mr. Anderson, you're all thinking now in your minds, he was inspirational. He was the one. He was Neo. He took the right pill, whether it's the blue or the red, I can never remember, but he went down into the Matrix and he fought the agents with the bullets and the jumping around, downloading jiu-jitsu into his mind. Mr. Anderson, in my world, was not Neo. He was not the one, but he did set me on my path with some things that he did. And he created failure for me with chemistry. And I've been scarred for my entire life. So this is Mr. Anderson, my Mr. Anderson. And we called him Scully. Not to his face, clearly. But we called him Scully because he looked a little bit like this. And his view of children were an unnecessary addition to the whole chemical curriculum, and that they were there to learn about alkanes and alkenes and hydroxyl ions and organic chemistry and all this horrible, horrible stuff. And I had loved chemistry. I loved chemistry as a GCSE student, when we could make things, when we could create things. So poor old Scully, who probably is not on this planet anymore, may be looking down on us right now thinking, there's Keene, I said he was a failure. Poor Scully really, really upset me, and I was a little rebellious at the time. I formed a punk band. I was into comic books, Dungeons and Dragons. You might remember those old games and things that we played. And I was generally a little difficult to deal with. And Mr. Anderson found it hard to deal with me, and Mr. Anderson was probably thinking, this was before The Matrix, but if we were playing the Matrix story out here, he was thinking, I don't like that agent there, he's kind of fighting me, I have to fight him. And I refused to do the revision timetable that Mr. Anderson set us. So at that point he said, this is how you will revise, this is what's right for you, this is how you will follow through. And we fought over this. Not like Neo in The Matrix, but we fought. There was this battle going on. So Mr. Anderson and I fell out. I then left school. I did my A-levels. I moved on. He set me away from chemistry, which was my first love. I loved chemistry, and I also loved art in my GCSEs. Mr. Anderson cured me of that, and I went off to do programming instead, which was one of my other loves. And the interesting thing there is Mr. Anderson also turned me off education. And he caused me to fail at education. And the reason that Mr. Anderson caused me to fail is this picture here. So when I'd done my GCSEs, I was firmly in this middle segment here of this Venn diagram. I could see art and I could see science. And like Neo, I could bring them together. And I could see the wonder of the two working together. Creativity and science and data coming together to do things. I can still remember in school, as part of my education, having to choose my A-levels and being mortified that I did not have the choice to do physics, maths, and art, which was what I wanted to do. And the head teacher at the time, when we went to speak to him, said, no, you're either a scientist or you're an artist. You will fail if you try to be both. So, another failure. I failed at opening a comic book store. I never won at D&D particularly, never got to a high level. I failed with Scully in the chemistry tests. But when I left school, I decided that's it. University's not for me. And I went to become an apprentice programmer. And I joined a company called Royal Insurance in Liverpool, where I'm from. And I spent the next 2 years failing, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it, and I learned something from it. So I was learning System 370 IBM mainframe assembly language, which is really hard. Really low-level machine code in big, old, clunky mainframes, bigger than this room, very hot. And what I would do, and the thing that I found my passion to be, would be I would do support, and I would do overnight support. As a 19-year-old, this was great. I had a motorcycle. I could go through the Mersey Tunnel at like midnight, go into an office with green screens everywhere, a little like The Matrix, wander around, cup of coffee in hand, and fix broken computer programs. And those broken computer programs, when I would get into the office, the operators would have printed them off, and there'd be a huge stack of paper there. And you'd have to work through and you'd have to fix them. And I loved that failure. I loved fixing that failure. I loved the iteration of it. I loved working through failure. And I started to get hooked on it in my career. And it's interesting, now I'm working at Google, I see how Google uses failure internally and how we manage failure. And I never knew any of this theory, any of the psychological theory behind managing failure. But the psychological theory that we use now at Google is called growth mindset. So what we try to do with our teams, as we're coaching colleagues, as we're working together, is to adopt a growth mindset. So for any of you who have not come across this technique before, the idea is that you think about the effort you put in, how you moved forward, and what you learned from failure. Not about, did you manage to close that deal? Yes or no, binary. Were you successful or were you a failure? Because the body has a chemical reaction to success. So when you're successful, your body releases testosterone. And we have something called the winner effect. So all of the studies that have been done on winning and losing are that if you win regularly, you become better at winning. kind of there's a logic to that. And boxers use this. So when boxers fight other boxers, first of all, they fight people who they will definitely beat. And they get better by doing that. And it's not just muscles. There's a psychological process of testosterone being released and dopamine then going into the brain and building up their connections. It's an addiction. It's a chemical addiction. Similar to a lot of other things out there that make you feel good. Cocaine, sex, all those other kind of things. All those are the great things in life. No. A lot of other things in life give you that hit. Failure releases a different set of chemicals. So one of the tricks here with growth mindset is how do you get the body to release positive chemicals when you fail and as you fail? And growth mindset is the key to managing that chemical balance and managing the way that it works. Understanding that challenges are the things that help you grow. Understanding that actually effort are the things that build your muscles. So, you think about lifting weights in a gym. Lifting weights in a gym only works if you do it a lot. You build the muscle. The brain is a muscle. Try, fail, try, fail, try, fail. Eventually you succeed. So creating an environment with adults, with your teams that you work with colleagues, with friends, with family, with children, around growth mindset and around pushing people into areas of failure, but not too far, is critical. And as we talk about what types of failure we should think about, there are 7 types that I want you to take away from this. Here are the 7 types of failure. You probably don't often see slides like that. 7 types of failure we're going to tell you about today. Do none of these. Actually, no. There's one there that's really, really good. Catastrophic failure is bad, okay? Do not do catastrophic failure. Catastrophic failure is kind of like, well, you can imagine. I'm sure I'm not going to describe catastrophic things. The one here that's really, really safe and interesting is fast, cheap, and safe. Okay? And I'm going to ask you all to take a vow at the end of this session about adopting some fast, cheap, and safe failure strategies. But let's talk briefly about the others. Failure of others. If you watch other people in a classroom fail, you will feel superior. You'll go, yeah, they failed. I didn't fail. You don't get the same chemical engagement. If you see somebody on a video or in TV fail, you don't learn from it. So actually experiencing the failure and turning it into a positive experience and a positive chemical reaction that's not about superiority versus inferiority is really important. So as you're working with teams of people, with children, etc., how do you help everybody have moments of failure in a safe, positive way that helps them be on a journey to somewhere? Historical failure is what we often do. We say, okay, I'm now at business school. Here's a case study. This is how somebody failed in the past. Managing a particular business. Great, I've learned that. Tick. I've filed it in the brain in the same way that Mr. Anderson would have tried to get me to learn alkanes and alkenes. I've filed it in the brain under knowledge that I can pull back. It's not muscle memory. I don't know how to do that. So finding ways to avoid others failing and historical failure is key, which is where we come into this fast, cheap, and safe. Other things on the bottom, I really wouldn't go there. They can be positive, not great. Big companies tend to go into slow, expensive, and dangerous failure. Often politicians and governments also go into slow, expensive, and dangerous failure. Creeping failure is something that actually you're not really quite noticing is happening, and you're slowly creeping towards failure. Catastrophic failure clearly is, very, very bad, and you don't want to go there. That's where people die, and it's not good. And passive failure is when you don't even notice that you're failing. Nobody realizes. You're pumping bad chemicals into the atmosphere, and nobody has noticed. So from all of these types of failure, park in your brain fast, cheap, and safe failure. For kids, for adults, for teams, for businesses, etc. And then start to park that around this framework here. So how we get to success through growth mindset is by saying and acknowledging to ourselves and creating an environment where we know that we are going to keep trying and that there is no fail, as Yoda or somebody said. We keep failing, we keep trying. And this is like a scientific experiment. We're inching forward towards success. So each failure that's safe, that's reasonably cheap, that doesn't bankrupt you, is a step towards success. Acknowledge that success. Say, great, we've made one more step forward. It may take 10,000 failures before you hit that success, but that's going to be a big success for you. So adopting a growth mindset, this framework of repeated trying to grow ideation, to kill off quickly ideas that are not working so that you don't get into the slow, long, and dangerous cycle, and to move whatever it is you're doing forward is critical to the way to success. And at the heart of that is celebrating failure. Celebrate failure, celebrate effort. Well done, everybody. This didn't work out, but this is what we learned from it. Celebrate with children, celebrate with teams. Do not penalize them. You penalize them, you shut down their risk-taking. So, finally, I'm going to ask everybody, can you all just raise your whatever hand you want to raise here? So I promise that I will take some safe, cheap, and fast risks once a week for the next month. Okay, and what I'd like you to do is to schedule an hour per week to do something that you think will fail, okay? I want you to come up with a big problem and apply some different thinking that you think isn't going to work and see what you learn from it. See how that failure can transform and celebrate that failure and go, that was pretty good, it failed, but you know what, I feel good because we've moved forward. We've taken one step forward on the path to success. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you all fail. Thank you.